Namaste, beloved friends. And today we have very beautiful guest with us, Swami Brahmanand ji. And he is the disciple of great Saint Swami Muktananda. And today I am going to interview him, and let's take his journey and how he started his journey. And I will ask some questions, and let's see how the things will unfold. So my first question, Swamiji, how you started your spiritual journey?
I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic school, so I had a yearning for God at an early age. And somewhere around the age of 18, I became disenchanted with the teachings of the Catholic Church. Some of the teachings just didn't make sense to me. So I started a spiritual journey that took me around the world. I visited over 70 countries over a 7-year period, studied the different world religions and practiced them as best I could. So when I was in France, for example, practiced Christianity. When I was in the Middle East, I went to school in Lebanon, in Beirut, Lebanon. Got introduced to a Sufi master. Spent time in Japan where I learned Zen Buddhism and practiced Zazen, and I still felt the need to find my own path. And so after traveling for 7 years around the world, Swami Muktananda came to the West, and my yoga teacher introduced me to him, and from the very first meeting I knew that this was my teacher.
Wow, it's so interesting. And you also told me the story before meeting the Muktananda, how was your body and all the things, and what happened after first meeting of the Muktananda. That story it's really fascinating for me.
I'd be delighted to tell you my first meeting with Muktananda. He came to New York City where I was living, but I was too busy to meet him at the time. My yoga teacher said, "Come meet this great saint, he's here." But I was producing a feature movie and directing an off-Broadway play at the same time. So I didn't have time for anything, and I said, I would love to meet your teacher, but I just don't have the time. So I went into work on Monday. I was the line producer, and the executive producer came and said, "We're way over budget, and it's your responsibility. You're fired." Yeah. So my day job of making the film was over. The play that I was directing opened that weekend, and it opened on Friday, and it closed on Sunday with very bad reviews. So the play closed. So going from being overworked to having no work at all, that Monday morning, my yoga teacher said, "There's a group of us traveling to California by car. I know you're really busy, but you're welcome to come if you have the time." And I said, "I've got the time." So I traveled out west, and during our journey there, my Muktananda had suffered a heart attack. So I was very concerned that I might not be able to meet him in time. And so we arrived in the ashram. He was in the hospital in San Francisco, and sent word that he would like to meet me. There were a few of us. He said, "Come, I'd like to meet you. I'll give you private darshan." So I prepared very carefully for that darshan. I'd been around the world, and I felt like this might be my teacher, and so I really wanted to make a good impression on him. So I meditated that morning a little longer than usual. I heard he could read people's minds, and I didn't want him to read my mind in those days. So I purified my mind, and then I had a cup of coffee so my mind would be alert in case he asked me an esoteric question like, "What's the sound of one hand clapping?" Something like that. Then I put on my spiritual clothes. This was the 70s. So I had a denim jacket with all the signs of the zodiac on the back and a big Om patch on my jeans, And so with all these expectations, I went to meet Muktananda. I was brought before him, waiting for that test question, my mind clear and pure, right? And he looked at me and said, "What's your name?" And I couldn't think of it. I couldn't remember. My mind was absolutely blank. And then he said, well, where are you from? And again, I couldn't remember, but I remembered my name. I was just like 2 beats behind him. "I'm David." And I said, "Very good, very good. What kind of work do you do?" And again, no idea, but I remembered where I was from. I said, "Baba, I'm from New York." And as soon as I said that, I realized I'm not from New York. I'm from Pittsburgh, but I was living in New York. So I felt really embarrassed. I just met my teacher and had told him a lie and forgot my name. He didn't think much of it. He said, go over here and sit and meditate for a while. So I did. I leaned up against the wall. And he was meeting the next person. And during the conversation, he looked over at me. And I felt a ray of light go out of his eyes and enter my heart. And my heart just opened instantly. It was just like I was madly, madly in love in a way I'd never experienced that before. The tears were just streaming down my cheek. There was light all around me, and I was just in ecstasy. And I went into samadhi and stayed there for at least 3 hours. Everybody left, and they let me sit there. Baba said, don't disturb him. And I stayed there for 3 hours, and I knew from that moment on that I would never leave my teacher, and I didn't. I lived with him until he took Mahasamadhi some 7 years later. So I lived with him and did his sadhana. Best time of my life, truly.
Yeah, such an amazing story, Hit. And the student and the teacher, master and the disciple.
Let me add something to that. You asked me about the arthritis that I had. So one of the things I didn't mention is that because of the overwork and the stress and my lifestyle at the time, I had very bad arthritis. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and was taking cortisone injections to numb the pain, butazolidine, and it was just getting worse and worse. I actually met Muktananda on crutches. After meeting with him and after that initiation that took place, the Kundalini energy was awakened and began a process of moving within me. And over a period of 9 months, I went through wild, what we call kriyas, physical movements, pranayama, meditation, asana practice, all sorts of things happened spontaneously without my effort. And over a period of 9 months, all of the arthritic deposits were completely dissolved. I went back to my attending physician. He said, it's a spontaneous remission of rheumatoid arthritis, which doesn't happen. He'd never seen that before. But it was truly a miracle of the awakening through grace.
Yeah, it's really such a power of the grace. I want to ask you, what was your task during when you are living with the masters, with your guru in the ashram? What was your doing, and all kind of things?
I got to have a little taste of pretty much every job in the ashram. And as I look back, I realized that Baba was training me to be able to run an ashram. So before he took Mahasamadhi, he asked me to start an ashram in Los Angeles, where I was the spiritual director. And I had at that point done pretty much every job in the ashram, everything from cleaning toilets to plumbing, electric. I worked as a carpenter for a while. I worked in the kitchen for a long period of time, chopping vegetables, learning to cook. And then eventually I was a teacher. So I taught in the Siddha Yoga teaching courses, trained teachers, and eventually was his master of ceremonies. So whenever he would give a public program, I would be the one who would introduce him, introduce the other speakers. When we would do our intensives and retreats, I would be the principal teacher. And then one fine day, before he left his body, he said, I want you to stay in Los Angeles and open an ashram, which I did. And it was a great joy to serve him in that way.
Yeah, nice. The next question is, now you are starting teaching the Kashmir Shavism. How it started? How you come to the Kashmir Shavism and how you started teaching this?
Well, my own Baba, in addition to being a great sadhu, was also a great scholar. Read Sanskrit fluently and taught from different scriptures. And in his own sadhana, he explored many, many different things. He was primarily a Vedantin, as a traditional sannyasi. So he knew the Vedas and the Upanishads and Vedanta and Patanjali. And those were the paths that he used in his own sadhana, in his own realization. After his realization, he got introduced to the teachings of Kashmir Shavism through Lakshmanju, and recognized that this most clearly reflected his actual experience, his experience of the world as a play of consciousness, as the divine, and began to teach, still taught from the tradition of Vedanta, the world as we see it, is an illusion. Brahman alone is real, and the individual soul is Brahman. He still taught that, but he began to incorporate teachings of Kashmir Shavism, which is a monistic tradition, that everything is consciousness, everything is a play of the Shakti. Began to teach that. So I got introduced to it in 1975. Baba released a book at that time called Siddha Meditations, which was a small little book. It was his commentary on his favorite shlokas from Kashmir Shavism, from Shiva Sutras to Pratyabhidna Ridam to Spandakaraka, Vidyambariva Tantra. He did commentaries on that. And I became very fascinated with that particular aspect of his teachings. And Baba told me at that point, he said, study a sutra a day. Just take one sutra, learn the Sanskrit, memorize the Sanskrit, apply it to your life. And so that became my practice. I would take one sutra, Chaitanya Matma, Jnanam Bandha, whatever it was, and read everything I could, read all the commentaries on it. And many of these scriptures, by the way, at that time, had not yet been translated into English. So I had Swami Tejomayananda was like my mentor. He was also a disciple of Baba, and he taught a few of us, or just a handful of us, who learned the Sanskrit and learned the shlokas directly from the Sanskrit. So this became a passion of mine, and I began teaching it back in 1980. So I've been teaching it for more than 40 years. And one of the things that was interesting to me was to bring that teaching to the West and to teach it in places where you wouldn't normally expect it. I taught it in businesses. I taught it in churches. I traveled to over 200 churches in the United States, and I developed an ability to teach the essence of the teachings as well as the practices without using any Sanskrit or using any names of God like Shiva or Shakti. So this was my gift, was to translate it into to a language that Westerners could receive and practice.
Really great time, like 40 years you are teaching the things, and it's really great experience. And next question I want to ask about Baba Muktanand. Yeah, some incident with you, some anything you want to share about the Baba?
So many experiences. He was truly an amazing teacher. To just sit in his presence, and watch the miracles, watch the transformation that took place. He was a great teacher, and at the same time you could learn just being in the silence with him. He taught me in many, many different ways. Taught me meditation, but he also taught me how to practice meditation in the world, in my daily life. The early years of being with Baba were mostly about meditation. I was completely absorbed in meditation and the teachings. So I liked the Jnana Yoga and I liked Dhyana Yoga. Those were two things I naturally resonated with and really enjoyed. At a certain point, Baba told me I should work in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. And this was not something I really wanted to hear. I liked my life as it was. I was a bliss bunny, or space cadet, as we would often say. I just liked to live in that state of ecstasy, and the idea of chopping vegetables all day long and doing nothing else, because he instructed me, don't meditate, don't come to the classes, just chop vegetables. That's your seva. And the kitchen was a very difficult place to work, because we had 1,000 people, 3 meals a day. That's a lot to chop, and it's all day. So my day would start 3:30 in the morning chopping vegetables for breakfast, and after breakfast we'd chop for lunch, then spend the whole afternoon chopping for dinner, right, and nothing else. And I had some resistance to doing that, so I wasn't really very good at it. I was sort of lukewarm, And one day I was chopping cucumbers, and Baba came in, and he saw me. I was not that good at chopping, kind of slow, half here, half there, He said, give me your knife. And there was a piece of cucumber about this big. And he took it, and he took the knife, and he went, just like that, just like in an instant it was chopped perfectly. Each one the perfect shape, perfect size. And he looked at me and said, count the pieces. There's 30 pieces there. Count the pieces. So I did. I counted them, but there was only 27 instead of 30. And I'm thinking like, do I blow his cover? He said there would be 30, but there's only 27. But I knew he would know if I wasn't telling the truth. I said, Baba, There's only 27. And he laughed. He said, turn the knife over. Flip the knife over. On the other side, there was 3 pieces, 30 pieces, each perfectly cut in a flash. And he looked at me and said, that's meditation. Learn how to chop like that. That's your meditation. So that became my mantra from then on. All I wanted to do was to learn how to chop like that, because it was the direction straight from the Guru. So I did that. Maybe the next 6 or 8 months, that's all I did was just chop, 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 and become completely one-pointed. And one day we were chopping bananas. By this time I'd gotten pretty good. I was known as the head chopper. I was the chief among the choppers, right? So I got the cushy jobs, the really good job. Chopping bananas is very easy, right? I had a whole team of people peeling the bananas to keep up with me. So I'm chopping I've gotten good at this. I'm cutting really fast. Everyone's the perfect shape and the perfect size. And suddenly I found myself enveloped in a ball of light. It was just this glow. And everything slowed down, where I could see each cut, just like the samurai movies or the Matrix, where everything's in slow motion. You can see it. And I was just filled with ecstasy. And I was really experiencing samadhi while I was working. At that moment, Baba knocked on the door, and he laughed. He said, you'll never learn how to chop. Now you should go teach. The next day I went from the kitchen to being the master of ceremonies and leading the programs. Then put me in charge of the courses and the programs. But that was the way he trained me. Chopping vegetables. Chop vegetables, what did he say? Chop wood, carry water, chop vegetables.
Wow, it's really, really amazing. It's like chopping vegetable and you get the samadhi. My mind also got blank.
If you'd like, I can talk a little about Kashmir Shavism.
Yes.
Was that just the essence of the teachings of Shavism is that everything is consciousness.
I want to ask how a common person can understand the Kashmir Shavism.
Mm-hmm. Well, try to make it very simple. It says the fundamental teaching is Chaitanyam Atma, that the nature of reality is consciousness, that everything is consciousness. And this is a response to the Vedantic viewpoint that the world is an illusion. Shaivism says everything comes from the Supreme Being. From nothing comes something. From pure consciousness comes all of this. And it goes through a process. It describes a process of creation in 36 stages from consciousness to matter. And says that matter resides in every particle, consciousness resides in every particle of the universe, even in a blade of grass or a speck of dust. Consciousness is there. So the sadhana of Shaivism, the practice, is to see consciousness in everyone and everything. So we meditate in order to recognize the divinity within. When we're with other people, with other human beings, the practice is to see the divine, to see the consciousness existing in other people. And that includes our situations in life, our work, whenever there's a conflict or something that we don't like, to see it as a play of consciousness. To live in the world as if it's a garden of delight, as if we're already in heaven. We're already living in paradise. So Shaivism doesn't teach you to leave the world, renounce the world, or even transcend the world, but to bring consciousness of the divine into the everyday living experience. So my Baba would say, you don't need to quit your job. You don't need to leave your family and go to the forest. Just realize the divinity that's in you and in everyone else and in everything, and live a life of great joy. So there are different practices in Shaivism that you can use to have that experience. So if you receive the teaching, I say Chaitanya Matman, and you recognize it, you're finished. But if you don't recognize it, then there's meditation, and there's karma yoga, and there's hatha yoga, and jnana yoga. All the different yogas are included in Shaivism. So each individual practices what most resonates in their heart. So if you're one with an open heart, you can practice love, bhakti yoga. You love your wife, you love your children, you love everything. If you like knowledge, you can read the scriptures and contemplate those, right? If you like to serve people, or if you have a job, right, you do it as selfless service. And all of these things are are paths to recognize that everything is consciousness, and that consciousness is not different from the supreme consciousness. So the supreme being dwells in the hearts of each of us as our true self. We simply suffer because we forgot that. We get involved in success, business, making money, becoming famous, all these different things that distract us from the joy of a simple cup of coffee or smelling a beautiful flower. We don't really have to do anything to experience this joy. It's always there. But we create things to do that keep the mind busy, and when the mind is active, we're cut off from the essential truth, the consciousness that underlies it. We get stuck in the world of form and worry about money and paying the bills and being successful or famous or whatever drives us. Whereas if we stop, close our eyes and feel into our own being, the joy and the love that we're looking for out there is already inside of us. So we discover that. We learn to live in that place. And we can still function in the world. In fact, we function better. You learn how to chop vegetables, You can become a master of whatever it is, whether it's making a video or chopping vegetables or gardening or being an auto mechanic. We become good at what we do and we find joy in that. So that's the essence of Shaivism. Everything is consciousness. Nothing exists apart from consciousness. So it's all God, all of it.
So there is no suffering, there is no misery, there is only joy and there is only bliss. We can access it anytime, anywhere.
Absolutely.
That is the Kashmir Shavism.
Yeah. Let me add to that. So a lot of times people hear that we go beyond suffering, and there's a belief that in order to be happy you have to suffer. Shaivism says that's not true. You'll still have pain. You'll still, in the middle of the night, you'll stub your toe, or there'll be physical things that show up in your life, different difficulties, but we don't have to suffer around them. We can live in joy, but suffering is what we add to the natural. There is physical pain in the universe, but even that gets less and less. I mean, I'm 71 years old now, and I've been blessed. I don't have a single pain in my body, nowhere. And that's unusual for people of my, especially living the kind of life that I've lived. I've caused a lot of pain to this body. To be given the grace to transcend that is truly a blessing.
Swamiji, I wanted to ask you, you did the Kaya Kalpa, the 40 days living in complete darkness. Can you tell the experience?